Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving into some malicious compliance stories. Today we've got 3 tales of people who didn't respect boundaries, whether emotional, professional, or physical. One involves a sister-in-law who kept chipping away at a marriage during a vulnerable time. Another, a group of managers who insisted on being consulted across a 6-hour time gap. And the last, a woman who decided a private farm was a free petting zoo. Here we go. My sister-in-law has been chipping away at my marriage while I'm vulnerable. I finally fought back with something I knew would hurt. Was I wrong? For the past 2 months, I've been dealing with a medical condition that's turned my life upside down. I won't go into the details, but it's the kind of illness that drains you physically and mentally. There are days when standing up too fast makes the room spin, and even basic tasks feel overwhelming. I can't cook right now, and there are days when I struggle just to make it from the bedroom to the couch. Through all of it, my husband has been my anchor. He wakes up at 5 a.m. every day, cleans up around the house, prepares breakfast for me, packs his own lunch, and leaves for work. When he gets off, he comes straight home. He cooks dinner, does laundry, handles yard work, and manages every errand that needs to be done. He's the sole breadwinner at the moment, and somehow still finds the energy to sit with me when I'm having a bad night. Watching him do all of this has made me fall in love with him all over again. Unfortunately, not everyone sees it that way. My sister-in-law, let's call her Lauren, has developed a strange habit of making comments about men who leave their wives when they get sick. The first time she said it, I brushed it off as awkward conversation. You know, statistically, a lot of men leave when their wives get seriously ill, she said one afternoon while sitting at my kitchen table. I laughed it off and said, well, good thing I didn't marry a statistic. But she didn't stop. Every visit seemed to include a new remark. Have you noticed any changes in his behavior? She'd ask casually. When was the last time you checked his phone? She once said with a raised eyebrow. She would bring up percentages, citing articles she'd supposedly read like she was preparing me for something inevitable. She even said it once in front of my husband. It's just something to think about, she told him, staring at him as if waiting for a confession. He didn't react. He just went quiet and continued washing dishes. I told her afterward that those comments made us uncomfortable and asked her to stop. She didn't. A few days ago, my husband had to work late, unexpectedly. My brother and Lauren happened to be visiting that evening. Since I can't cook right now, I ordered takeout. It wasn't ideal, but it was manageable. Lauren made a comment about how it must be exhausting for my husband to carry everything alone. I'm sure he's starting to get tired, she said lightly, stirring her drink. It's a lot for one person. I felt my stomach twist, and it wasn't just from my condition. He's not tired of me, I said evenly. She shrugged. I'm just saying, statistics don't lie. She's been poking at this for weeks. Every visit, another comment, another seed planted, another reminder that she thinks your marriage is a number waiting to happen. You're sick. You're scared. You're dependent. And she keeps showing up to whisper doubt into the quiet spaces? That's not concern. That's something else entirely. Something in me snapped at that moment. I've been sick, vulnerable, dependent on someone else for basic things, and she kept planting seeds of doubt in a place where there was none. I turned to her and said, if we're discussing statistics, maybe you should look up the statistics on men leaving their wives because they can't get pregnant. The air in the room changed instantly. Lauren went pale. My brother stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. What the hell's wrong with you? He shouted. Lauren burst into tears and rushed outside. I suddenly felt nauseous, partly from my illness and partly from the adrenaline. My brother went on about how cruel I was. Lauren has struggled with infertility for years, and it's something I know hurts her deeply. He said I was a monster for weaponizing something so painful. He even called my husband at work, demanding he come home because I was out of control. By the time my husband walked through the door, I was exhausted and shaking. He asked what happened, and my brother filled the room with his version before I could speak. When I tried to explain, I felt too sick to argue properly. They eventually left, slamming the door behind them. Since then, it's escalated beyond our house. My brother, Lauren, and her mother are demanding an apology. Extended family members have started weighing in, most of them saying I went too far. My mom told me gently that I shouldn't have escalated the situation. Even my husband said, I understand why you're upset, but maybe that wasn't the best way to handle it. I know infertility is devastating. I would never mock that pain lightly. But I also feel like she's been deliberately poking at my vulnerability for weeks. I'm already dealing with the fear of being dependent, the guilt of not being able to contribute physically, and the anxiety of not knowing how long this condition will last. Having someone repeatedly imply that my husband's going to abandon me felt like salt rubbed into an open wound. I don't regret defending my marriage. I regret that it came out in such a sharp way. I wish I'd said something calmer, something that addressed her behavior without bringing her pain into it. But I also don't think I deserve to be quietly chipped away at under the guise of concern. My husband hasn't changed toward me at all. If anything, he's doubled down on reassuring me that we're in this together. The house is still running, the meals are still being cooked, the alarm still goes off at 5 a.m. every day. I'm considering reaching out to Lauren to say I'm sorry for the way I phrased my response, but not for setting a boundary. Because that's what this was about in the first place. She crossed one repeatedly, and I finally reacted. If she wants an apology, she may get one for the specific words I chose, but she's also going to hear clearly that my marriage isn't a statistical case study. It's real, it's solid, and it doesn't need her commentary hovering over it like a dark cloud. And our second story. Sometimes the fastest way to prove a point is to stop solving the problem they insisted didn't exist. Before I retired, I worked as both a manager and senior programmer in a US-based department for a large international company. My role was a hybrid one. I wrote code, reviewed architecture, assigned projects, created timelines, and answered the inevitable, "Hey, can you look at this?" questions from my team. Over the years, I'd built a strong group of programmers who trusted me and, more importantly, knew I would respond quickly when something blocked their progress. Everything changed when upper management decided to consolidate the US and UK programming departments. On paper, it probably looked efficient. One unified structure, fewer managers, streamlined oversight. In practice, it meant that all management responsibilities for both teams would now sit in the UK. The US team would report to managers located 6 time zones ahead of us. I was told that I would no longer manage anyone. I would focus solely on programming. I kept my salary, which was fair, and since I had the most experience among both teams, they wanted me concentrating on high-value technical output. That was the phrase they used. I didn't argue. If they wanted to remove the management side from my plate and still pay me the same, I was fine with that. The issue wasn't my workload, it was the 6-hour time difference. Our workdays overlapped for maybe 2 or 3 hours. When it was mid-morning in the US, it was already late afternoon in the UK. By the time our programmers were deep into problem solving, the UK managers were logging off. That left the majority of the US afternoon without direct managerial support. Naturally, my old team did what made sense. They came to me with questions. "Hey, quick question about the API change," one of them would say at around 3 p.m. "Do you know if we're supposed to refactor the old module or just patch it?" I knew the answer. I'd been part of the planning meetings. I could solve the issue in 30 seconds, so I answered them. They continued working. Deadline stayed intact. Apparently, this did not sit well with the UK managers. Within a few weeks, they began complaining to our shared boss that the US programmers were bypassing them. They felt undermined. They were frustrated that questions weren't being routed through proper channels. From their perspective, they had authority but weren't being consulted. From my perspective, my team was just trying to get work done before 5 p.m. Eventually, my boss called me into a video meeting. "You need to stop helping the U.S. staff with management questions," she said. "They need to go through their new managers." I explained the time difference problem again. I reminded her that most of these questions arose after the UK team had logged off. She acknowledged that, but reiterated that the structure needed to be respected. I nodded and said, "Understood." That was the moment I decided to follow instructions exactly as given. The next afternoon, one of my former direct reports walked over to my desk. "Hey, can you clarify the requirements for the client integration update?" he asked. It was 4:15 p.m. our time. The UK team had been offline for nearly an hour. "I'm not supposed to answer that anymore," I told him calmly. "You need to email your UK manager and wait for their response." He stared at me. "You're kidding." "I was instructed to stop helping with management-related questions," I said. "Time for a little malicious compliance." Word spread quickly. Instead of coming to me, the U.S. programmers began sending detailed emails to their UK managers, clarification on requirements, timeline adjustments, technical blockers. Every small decision that previously took a 2-minute conversation now became a documented request requiring cross-Atlantic coordination. And then they waited. By the time the UK managers saw the emails the next morning, the US team had already lost half a workday. Sometimes responses came quickly. Sometimes they required meetings. Sometimes clarification triggered follow-up questions. Each delay compounded. Within 2 weeks, deadlines started slipping. 2 minutes of answers turned into 24-hour email chains. The managers wanted to be consulted. They got exactly that. Now they're explaining to upper management why nothing's getting done on time. Our boss began asking the UK managers why their teams were missing milestones. The UK managers blamed communication delays. The US team pointed to the email thread showing they had requested guidance promptly. Everything was documented. No one could argue that instructions hadn't been followed. After another couple of weeks, the pattern became undeniable. The 6-hour gap wasn't theoretical anymore, it was measurable. Projects were now finishing days late instead of hours late. I was invited to another meeting, this time including multiple managers. "We're seeing productivity issues," my boss said carefully. "Do you have any thoughts?" I kept my expression neutral. "Yes," I replied. "You need management coverage in the U.S. during U.S. hours." There was a long pause. Eventually, the UK managers acknowledged the obvious. Without someone empowered to make decisions during U.S. afternoons, work would continue stalling. The time difference wasn't going away, and neither was the need for real-time problem solving. A week later, my boss reached out privately. "Would you be willing to resume managing the U.S. programmer?" she asked. I considered it for a moment. "I'm actually quite content just programming," I said. "It's less overhead." There was silence on the other end of the call. "Well," she added, "we can adjust your compensation if you're willing to take the management role back." Now that caught my attention. I hadn't asked for a raise when they removed my management duties. I hadn't complained when they centralized authority overseas. I'd simply followed their directive to the letter. And now they were offering more money to restore what had previously existed. I agreed with a salary increase. Once I resumed managing the U.S. team, productivity immediately returned to normal. Questions were answered in minutes instead of days. Deadlines were met. The UK managers focused on their own team during their own hours. The structure made sense again. The funny part is that nothing I said in the beginning had changed. The 6-hour time difference was always there. The operational friction was predictable. It just took a few missed deadlines and a flood of unanswered emails for upper management to understand it. I retired a few years later on good terms. Looking back, that period remains one of my favorite examples of how sometimes the fastest way to prove a point is to stop compensating for someone else's flawed plan. I didn't argue, I didn't complain, I simply stopped solving the problem they insisted didn't exist. And our last story. Karen tried to turn our private farm into a free attraction. A few months ago, my partner and I bought a house out in a rural area that came with something we hadn't originally planned for, a small farm. The previous owner was an older man who had clearly loved the place for decades, but his health wasn't what it used to be. After we'd signed on the house, he mentioned that he was considering selling the animals and some of the equipment because he couldn't manage it anymore. One conversation turned into 3, and eventually he offered to sell us the farm and animals as well. We're still finalizing the paperwork, but in practice, we've already taken over daily care. My partner's been spending most of his days at the farm while I work remotely from home. He's planning to retire early and become a stay-at-home dad, focusing on the animals and the land. Our daughter Lily is in absolute heaven. There are 2 new dogs she follows around like they're royalty, and she's completely fallen in love with a massive draft horse who is, without exaggeration, the gentlest creature I've ever met. Watching her brush that horse while humming to herself feels like something out of a wholesome countryside commercial. That peaceful image is what makes what happened next so absurd. Not even an hour before I'm writing this, a woman of impressive entitlement climbed over our fence with 7 children in scout uniforms trailing behind her. I don't know which troop they belong to, but they look to be around 10 or 11 years old. My partner spotted them first and walked over calmly to ask what they were doing. The farm fence isn't decorative. It's clearly meant to keep animals in and strangers out. When asked why she was on private property, the woman pointed at the ducks and chickens wandering near the coop and said, "We saw the little ducks and chickens, and we wanted to pet them." "It's clearly a petting zoo since they're here," She gestured toward me and Lily brushing the horse as if that somehow proved her theory. My partner explained that this was not a petting zoo and that she was trespassing. I stepped closer and confirmed that we were the owners, or caretakers technically, and that she needed to take the children and leave. Instead of apologizing, she escalated. She demanded that we let the kids in for free and insisted that we give them rides on what she referred to as the pony. It took real restraint not to laugh at that. The horse she was eyeing weighs nearly a ton. Draft horses are enormous, and while they're calm, they're not carnival attractions. A fall from that height could seriously injure a child, especially one who doesn't know how to sit properly in a saddle. I calmly told her that the horse was not available for rides and that this was not open to the public. That's when the adult tantrum began. She started shrieking about how heartless we were, how we were ruining the children's day, and how she would get my partner fired. I'm still not sure who she thought employed him, considering we own the place. She also threatened to leave a terrible review, which would be impressive given we don't run a business. A few colorful words were thrown in for emphasis because apparently that was necessary. She was going to get him fired from a job he doesn't have at a business that doesn't exist and leave a review that no one will read. That's a full strategy built on absolutely nothing. The kids looked mortified, which tells you everything about who was actually embarrassing themselves. My partner stayed calm and told her plainly, "You need to leave now or we'll call the police." That only seemed to fuel her further. The kids, to their credit, looked mortified. They shuffled awkwardly behind her while she continued her performance. We were seconds away from calling law enforcement when we got unexpectedly lucky. The previous owner happened to be pulling into the driveway with some veterinary paperwork we needed to sign. He saw the woman inside the fence and immediately understood what was happening. I've never seen a 70-something-year-old man move that fast. He marched straight up to her and unleashed a lecture that could have peeled paint. He told her in no uncertain terms that she was trespassing on private agricultural property and that if she didn't remove herself and the children immediately, he would personally call the sheriff. There was no room for debate in his tone. Within minutes, she gathered the kids and stormed off, muttering about how unreasonable we were. Once she was gone, we all stood there in stunned silence. The dogs had been barking the entire time, and the ducks had retreated to the far side of their pen like they'd seen this type of nonsense before. The old owner shook his head and said it's amazing what people assume is theirs just because they can see it. We went back to signing paperwork as if nothing had happened. Lily, however, had her own commentary. After watching the entire spectacle, she looked up at me and said, "Mommy, I think that lady is strong in the dumb side." I blame her father for encouraging creative phrasing. Later, I contacted the local scout council to inform them that someone had brought a group of kids onto private farmland without permission. They were polite and apologetic. Without a name or troop number, there wasn't much they could do, but they assured me they would remind leaders that our property is not public access. I even told them that if they ever needed to use the nearby creek for an activity or had an emergency, they were welcome to ask first. We aren't unreasonable, we just expect basic respect. I did see the woman again at the grocery store a few weeks later. It's a small community, so that was inevitable. She avoided eye contact entirely, which was probably for the best. I didn't need a sequel to the farm invasion saga. For now, the fence is intact, the draft horse is unbothered, and the ducks remain blissfully unaware of their alleged role in a non-existent petting zoo. If anyone wants to meet our animals, they can start by knocking on the gate like a civilized human being. Otherwise, they can admire them from the public road and keep their climbing adventures to themselves. Let's talk about what each of these stories reveals about entitlement. The sister-in-law wasn't offering help or even honest concern. She was planting doubt in a marriage she had no part in, under the guise of just saying. The question is why no one told the sister-in-law to stop weeks ago. The UK managers were so focused on preserving their authority that they ignored operational reality. The programmer didn't fight the structure, he just stopped propping it up, and when it collapsed under its own weight, they had to pay him more to restore what he'd been doing all along. The farm trespasser built an entire fantasy in her head. She threatened to get someone fired from a job that doesn't exist at a business that isn't real. The kids understood the embarrassment before she did. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.